Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this presentation by the National Park Service. This is February 6, 2023, and this is a presentation to us tonight, both those who are here in Village Hall and those that might be live streaming this event. A presentation on the final results of an integrity and condition study that was authorized by the Park Service just a few years ago with respect to the Pinehurst National Historic Landmark. A few years ago, when I became mayor and other members were voted into office, we had the idea that we needed to improve the relationship with the Park Service and understand better the guidelines that we could use as to be good stewards of the Pinehurst National Historic Landmark. And the result of it was we made some phone calls, reached out to the Park Service, and began to develop a commentary and a relationship with them that led to this particular study, which we're delighted they would have the opportunity to do. I also want to make note that we've just finished the year 2022. That would have been the 200th anniversary of the birth date of Frederick Law Olmsted on the one hand, and the 150th birth date of Donald Ross on the other. And both those gentlemen obviously were those who were in the very basic start of what became the Pinehurst National Landmark over a period of time. I want to introduce Cynthia Walton from the National Park Service in Atlanta, who will deliver this presentation with her colleagues here and introduce them to us tonight. So Cynthia, welcome. Thank you for being here and thank you for this report.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of the National Park Service, I wanted to thank everyone for coming out here tonight. You need me to speak louder? I guess that's why he was holding it up, huh? We kicked off this study thanks to Mayor Strickland reaching out to us in 2020, right as COVID was starting. So while we would have wished to have been here before the end of the study, we're at least grateful to have this opportunity to present the final results to you here today. And my colleague Ellen is going to give the bulk of the presentation, but I did want to, once again, on behalf of the National Park Service, thank Mayor Strickland and everyone in the mayor's office, members of the Village Council, Jeff Sanborn, the Historic Preservation Commission, and all the members of the public who've contributed to this study. It really was, your comments were really integral to the final report, and so we thank you for investing your time in this important study that we hope will help be a useful tool in the management of the National Historic Landmark District. So now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ellen Rankin.
Thank you, Cynthia. Oh, look, when you're short, it works. So thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. And again, thank you for all of your comments throughout the course of the study. Brief agenda. As many of you have already seen some of our presentations, I will still talk about the NHL program and it's the background of the project. Then we'll go into the study findings. And if you have any questions or comments, we are more than welcome to look at those or listen to those. And if you want any more additional information, this is the website for the project that we've had throughout. And this is also in the news releases. And this is where you will find the full report, because tonight I'm just going to highlight a couple of the key findings and key recommendations. I'm not going through absolutely everything, or we would be here for hours. So, a brief overview of the National Historic Landmarks Program and some misconceptions of what an NHL designation entails. You've seen the bronze plaque and you've seen this other plaque, but what do those plaques mean? There are two programs that the federal government has in place to recognize historic properties. There's the National Register of Historic Places and then the National Historic Landmarks Program. I also want to note that Pinehurst does have a local historic district which is not one of our programs and has its own separate overlay, which is highlighted in the report and has its own ordinances that comes with that. So the National Register is the broader of the two programs. That's what most people know of. And properties listed in the National Register are significant on the state, local, or national level. And they are significant just even to a community. And often it is confused with the National Historic Landmarks, which is a smaller program which all properties must be of national significance to the history of America. So here's an example of two different ones. On the right is the Duke Homestead and the Tobacco Factory, which is a National Historic Landmark. But on the other side is just a contributing property to a local historic district because it was significant to its community. And to give you a sense of the difference, out of over 90,000 properties listed in the National Register, only about 3%, or just over 2,600 properties, are National Historic Landmarks. So that makes Pinehurst special. Now, what does this mean if you are an NHL and why we're here and we're talking about a condition and integrity? So most National Historic Landmarks and National Register properties are owned by private individuals or groups, and listing or designation places no restrictions on private property owners, including state or local governments. The National Park Service can be invited to recommend, but we do not have any ownership on what would happen to a private property unless there is federal funding involved, and then there is a law that is triggered. But owners should keep it also in mind that state laws or local ordinances may also affect a National Historic Landmark. So that's why we're also highlighting that there is that local overlay that may affect the National Historic Landmark District here. And on this screen is an example of what happened to one National Historic Landmark where my colleague actually worked with. And so it's Grant Park Stadium, also known as Soldier Field, where when they changed it so much, we had to withdraw its designation as a National Historic Landmark. Now let's get to the report. So shown in red is the National Historic Landmark boundary. And it's comprised of over 400 buildings, sites, structures, and objects. The blue is the Historic Overlay District. And it's similar, but not the same. So I'm just trying to make sure everybody knows that there's two different districts. And while local and federal projects are separate, what happens locally could have implications on the NHL as well. So here is the overall conclusion from our report. Despite the changes documented in the report, which I will go through, the overall historic character of the district remains evident. The description of the district from the NHL nomination is still accurate today, 27 years later. Although many of the buildings in and this is a quote from the nomination, although many of the buildings in Pinehurst are of architectural significance individually, it is the group of buildings in the developing landscape which has remained the strongest reflector of the historic character of the place. The Pinehurst Historic District possesses unity of overall design, location, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. And when you put all those 7 together, that's when we talk about that. When I say integrity later in this presentation, that's integrity. It's those 7 components together. The early vision of the place remains remarkably in focus, thus strongly conveying the historic development of Pinehurst during its period of significance, which is also important. It's 1895 to 1948. It is important to note, though, that a cumulative effect of small and large-scale changes to the district's landscape and buildings has the potential to erode its integrity in going forward. So the Village Green. Again, I'm just going to go through some key findings, but I encourage everyone to read the full report. It was supposed to be an undeveloped central oval, and it was part of the essential plan of the village. We do know that landscape-wise, that did not work, and that's why the pines were already in place by the 1950s. It was designated with 2 community buildings on the green, the chapel at the south end, and the non-contributing library at the north end. And then there were the understory trees, like I said, that was already accepted by the time of the nomination. So currently, only about 50% of the green remains. The central core and east side of the green remain largely as described in the nomination, but on the west side, there are several completed and planned projects which diminish the integrity of this important feature of the NHL. And I'm talking to you all, like I know the Pinehurst, so forgive me for this. But north of the Village Green is the Village Center, and it's the commercial hub. And a street-level survey and review of the Certificate of Appropriateness records issued for projects revealed that most of the alterations have been minor and related to changes in occupancy or the particular needs of the commercial area. So this was not a high area of concern. We're going to move into the residential area. And so this shows just what was demolished since 1996 at the time of designation. And notice there on the east side of the district. Sorry, my papers. And new construction, which has been kind of peppered throughout the district. And if you really want to look in the report, you can go lot by lot and take a look at this. But overall, there's only been 7 buildings that have been demolished out of the 288 residential buildings that were contributing to the district. The larger concern are material alterations, so not replacing wood siding with wood siding or putting stone up on wood siding, that type of information, and the subdivision of the lots. However, the subdivision hasn't been that great, but it is an area where we're kind of looking at, let's keep looking at this. Let's watch this in the future. And we all love our pines, hollies, magnolias, camellias, dogwoods, and azaleas. I have them in my own yard. And they actually provide that naturalistic ornamentation that was planned for the community. And what do we know Pinehurst about? Golf. So the all-encompassing Pinehurst Resort has several recreational facilities that have long offered activities for its guests, including golf, tennis, and equestrian sports. As we all know, Pinehurst is known for golfing, and there is an effort to preserve this important component of the community, including the restoration of courses 2 and 4. Also, we recognize the Fair Barn restoration. And it was between 1993 and 2003, where they converted the Fair Barn to an event center. And at the time, though, they took out 3 paddocks and 3 non-contributing structures and replaced it with parking. But despite all the updates, the Pinehurst Racetrack facility still reads as an equestrian facility. So complementing the residential, commercial, and recreational functions of the Pinehurst District is a collection of cultural and institutional buildings. And we know that physical changes with churches typically reflect the growth or changing needs of each particular church. And we know that Pinehurst has also had a library since its earliest days. As I mentioned, the library is not contributing because it was after the period of significance. But we recognize that this is an important resource to this community. Historic infrastructure. What does that mean? So one of the reasons that Pinehurst is listed as an NHL is because of its circular patterns and its roadways and its sand and clay paths. And we're going to discuss a couple of this. Also the planting beds and the picturesque landscape. It's known for its landscape. We all know about this one. It's the most significant change to the circular pattern of the district when it was constructed in 2008. Another concerning issue is alterations to the encroachment or loss of the sand and clay paths as a result of road widening or private yard encroachment or loss of space to historic drainage. My husband's a water engineer. I totally get it too. But now let's go to the good things. So adaptive reuse, you all saved the power plant and made it a brewery. And I'm sure it's very popular. And there are many examples throughout this area and in the report, but we're just highlighting this one for the sake of time, at the Holly Inn. All of the resort's early hotels survived to the present except for one. And all the smaller inns and boarding houses have undergone the rehabilitation as well. And so, and then there's also other local education and protection programs that you all have implemented, including the Village Planting Guide, the creation of the Arboretum, the Historic Plaque Program, and the establishment of the Historic Preservation Commission and its design guidelines. We're always going to come back to golf. We've mentioned that these are important and their ongoing maintenance and restoration is highly commended. So in 2010, the restoration of number 2 was brought back to its natural and historical character. And in 2018, the redesign of number 4 reintroduced the Ross designed course of the natural sandscape vegetation, the low bunkers, and the widened fairway. So at the end of this report, there's a lot of recommendations, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. Building a relationship. You have to love the Park Service when we put this up, right? We are a part of a team devoted to the care and stewardship of the district. Considering its national significance and the numerous management challenges it faces, it is important that we do take an active role in supporting the local community and state officials, private groups, and any individual in their efforts to preserve the district. And we hope that we would prioritize prompt as well as open and regular communication of in our shared goal of enhancing and preserving the district. So not everybody works in historic preservation, but there's so many tools out there. And we hope through this study that we can expand the public's knowledge of historic preservation agencies and organizations in achieving our objective of working with you all in preserving the district. These are just a couple that are out there, but some are also the State Historic Preservation Office, Preservation North Carolina, the North Carolina Main Street Center, the North Carolina Department of Commerce, the National Association for Olmsted Parks, and the National Alliance for Historic Preservation Commissions. For the Village Green, any further development will continue to erode the integrity of the Village Green. And new standalone buildings should not be planned on the green, and new additions should be designed with the utmost attention to scale, massing, style, and materials. And the Park Service is here to technically assist as well. We drove around today. We know there's traffic in Pinehurst. And we've heard your concerns about traffic volume, pedestrian safety, special event traffic. Now we know that we're coming next year again. And the need for traffic calming to improve quality of life in the district. Vehicular traffic needs a balance with historic preservation, and that's hard to do. And since historic infrastructure is vital to the identity, this should be really at the forefront of transportation planning. I know a study has been conducted. Thank you, Mayor Strickland, for sending that to us. But a full inventory of the original sand and clay paths and their material and conditions should be conducted to form the basis for any new effort to repair or reestablish them. Also, one recommendation was given to update the National Historic Landmark nomination. Yes, it was from 1996, and we have a lot older ones, but it didn't really look at anything beyond 1948, and we know there are a lot more buildings going into the 50s from there, but it needs to be looked at, and we can't say one way or the other at this point, but maybe that's something you all could consider. And when you're looking at updating a National Register nomination, also look at the boundaries, because the boundaries might be expanded or brought in based on where the resources are. just a recommendation. We're not doing it. So again, I encourage you just to go on the website and look on to review the full depth of the report. And then here's one last quote for you all. Of maintenance of any historic property, whether it be a single building or a large district, requires constant attention and active management. The National Park Service will continue to monitor the Pinehurst NHL district, and please keep us updated on your future projects. We are looking forward to assisting you all and our collaborative preservation partners in working towards a common goal of protecting the unique qualities that make the Pinehurst NHL a place of national importance. And there's the website again. So does anybody have any questions? Okay.
Thank you. Welcome and very interesting. We've been looking forward to this visit for some time. I'm Jack Farrell. I live in Pinehurst and have for some time. Two questions, if I may. One is that when the Park Service was here, some over 10 years ago, they quoted a number related to the ability of commercial establishments to get a federal tax credit for rehabilitation. I have a question whether or not that tax credit for rehabilitation for commercial structures is still in place. And number two, do you have any idea how much credit, so to speak, over the years people in the village of Pinehurst have used that?
The federal tax credit program is still in use. As for how much, I don't know if. This is the author of the report, by the way, Turco.
Well, I'm not asking you to kind of make this up. I'm just saying that information is available, and it would be some interest, I think, to the community of the tax credit that the commercial establishments have been able to gain by virtue of rehabilitation of historic structures. I think they quoted, this is well over 10 years ago, that $1 million of tax credit had been utilized. The second question is really the elephant in the room related to the traffic circle. And I thought I'd bring it up. The question is, does the Park Service have a position relative to the traffic circle and potential changes to the traffic circle over the years?
Which traffic circle?
Not the small traffic circle, the large traffic circle.
So that is a project still in process. And so that is going through consultation right now. And so we are not prepared to give an official position on that because we are also not a consulting party.
Okay.
But it is, even though it is outside the period of significance for the district, it was listed in the nomination as that it did not detract from the circulation patterns.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
About the traffic circle, you mentioned that you aren't prepared at this time to make any comments on it. Will you be prepared at some time in the near future to make any comments, or is that something that's just, you wait to see what we do and then comment after the fact?
So, like I said, there are federal laws that get put in place, and because this is not triggered by a federal law, we are not an official consulting party, but we are happy to provide comments once a final design is in to provide guidance. But at this point, we're just not ready to do anything. Yeah. There you go.
So when there's any federal funding, licensing, or permitting involved, we have an official role in the project. As far as we understand from talking to those involved, this particular project doesn't trigger what's called Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. So it wouldn't be the place of the National Park Service to issue any kind of statement or position. However, if someone were to ask us, hey, what is your opinion of this? We would be able to respond. So if that happens, we'd be happy to join in the conversation and try to provide assistance in the best way we can, but we wouldn't be simply making a statement on our own. If that makes sense.
I have an additional question. You mentioned a couple of times that the library building, what was the phrase, is not contributing to the status. Does that mean that changes could be made to that building that would not significantly impact the status?
So while the building is non-contributing, it is still part of the village green, and that is a contributing landscape. And so building upon the village green would be something that we would be concerned about.
Even to enlarge, let's say, or modify the existing structure for the existing purpose?
Yes.
You mentioned the sand clay path as a possible contributing threat to the future of the district and the conversion of those into brick. My question is, are there any kind of grandfather type things in place where you cannot then get sued or liable for ADA compliance when it comes to that walkability? So I think, we all want to have interconnected streets, reduce traffic, have walkable streets and all that kind of stuff as well. But if we're going to maintain those clay sand paths, does that increase our liability for non-ADA compliance on those paths?
That is outside of my purview. Ellen, do you?
Hi, I'm Ellen Turco, and I in part authored the report with my colleagues. So the problem with sand and clay paths is that they're sand and clay. So when 100 years ago they held up just fine, but to modern use and to golf carts and bikes and a lot more pedestrian traffic, they may not hold up as well. So what we were looking at and didn't land on, but I know we worked. One of our subconsultants on this project was McAdams, and they did our public engagement, but they also do a lot of landscape design and planning, looking at finding something that would mimic the sand and clay paths, but be more durable. I think some of those materials have been experimented with in the village, and I'm not a landscape architect, so I don't know exactly what those would be, but we did mention in the report, the brick is really not something that would have been here originally. So keeping that look of the sand and clay would be ideal, but also recognizing that it's got to be durable. It has to, be able to be sustained.
Does that answer your question? It's a work in progress of trying to figure out how to make it accessible and still keep the character defining features.
This isn't a question as much as I always think the people from the past don't get the credit they deserve. And I grew up here, and I know that condos were supposed to be developed on Rassy-Wicker Park, and a young council with no money got in debt up to their ears to buy it, with private money, I should say, and saved it. I also know the track was gone. It was going to be condos and development. A young council and the community stepped up and got it. And I don't know, I just think it's good timing to give them credit, because that was a long time ago. And we wouldn't even be where we're at if they weren't brave enough to do that. And I just thought it was a good time to give them credit. Thanks.
No other questions. I think we're done. And if you go on the website, my email is on there about 7 times. So you can always email me.
It has been brought to my attention that we are not a certified local government, and I'm wondering if that's because we haven't tried before, we don't qualify, and if so, is that something that we could go ahead and start the process of?
I might turn this question over to our consultant who knows a little bit about the history a lot more than I do.
Hi, I'm Ellen Turco, and I work with Richard Grubb and Associates, so we authored the report in conjunction with the Park Service. I'm not exactly sure why you're not a CLG. I believe that since you already have a commission, that you would be eligible to apply for it. I see Renee Gledhill-Early from the SHPO is actually here, and maybe could add to that as well, but I don't, if you are a certified local government, it opens you up to different types of training and grants that aren't eligible to other communities that don't have the CLG status. So I think that was one of our recommendations in the report, that you look into that. I don't think that there's any reason except maybe it just hasn't been pursued unless Renee knows something different. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ahmed Brkovic. I'm a former HOA president of one of the communities that bordered the traffic circle. And I noticed nothing was mentioned as far as in your presentation about, as people realize, that's probably our biggest overall traffic concern. Is there any description or mention or whatever dealing with the traffic circle in the detailed report?
Are you talking about the Midland Traffic Circle?
Is that, oh, is it? Yeah, okay, that's a,
Yes, it is mentioned in the report. The National Park Service is only really engaged when there's called Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, when I mentioned federal funding, permitting, licensing. Because none of that is happening, the Park Service is not officially engaged in that project, but it is in the report, and so we don't have any official comments on the traffic circle or its current design plans.
and I assume since it is part of the district, is there any way where can things be just kind of sectionally removed from the historic? It seems like of the Olmsted stuff, as far as I don't know, I don't think is a circle part of was that original planning. Is that a possibility where that then frees up more options as opposed to, I assume it has to get, anything that gets done to the circle would have to get reviewed and would at least reviewed, whether reviewed and approved by the Park Service?
So we would only review something if the federal law is triggered, but it is in the National Historic Landmark nomination that it does adhere to the ideals of the Olmsted firm's plan. If there was an update to the nomination, that would be a different consideration, but as I said, we are not in the position to, we don't have the research or anything on that at this point. Renee.
Hello, I'm Renee Gledhill-Early. I'm the Environmental Review Coordinator for the State Historic Preservation Office, and I'm glad to comment on questions. As was explained, the National Park Service is only parties to projects that involve federal licenses, permits, funding, or approval. At this point in time, what we know is that there are no federal permits, license approvals, or funding tied to this project. Therefore, it is subject to North Carolina's General Statute 121-12A. And that says, that any state agency whose undertakings may affect a National Register listed property must consult with the North Carolina Historical Commission and receive its comments. That said, I've been the Environmental Review Coordinator for 40 years. I have never seen a state agency take the recommendations of the North Carolina Historical Commission. So the other part of that law is the law, it's called the law that allows us to gum them to death. And that is exactly where we are now. We have not been formally contacted by the North Carolina Department of Transportation concerning the traffic circle. We have had conversations with them about Morganton Road.
And I will also say that because we're not a consulting party, if the village asks for an opinion from the Park Service, we can send an opinion, but it is not a formal consultation opinion. Yes, Lydia.
Hi, I'm Lydia Bosch. I'm a member of the Pinehurst Village Council. There clearly is a lot of information in this report that we're going to have to work through. One thing that is of particular interest to me is, I think on the slide before, you talked about working with the tourism industry. We've got this incredible designation. What do we do with it? And I know I've seen in your materials cultural heritage tourism or heritage tourism. I'm not sure what exactly it's officially called, but at some point, we may be interested in what other communities are doing to promote their landmark designation. Do we want to do walking tours? It's something. We have this amazing asset. What do we do to promote it to our own residents? What do we do to promote it to the North Carolinians? I don't know. That's just something that appeals to me. So, and maybe to my council colleagues. But if there are other communities in this country, landmark communities or landmark properties that do a great job of promoting their asset, why create the wheel? Maybe there's something we can learn from other communities. So that's just, I don't know, it's so much a question, it's just a comment or an observation.
And it is something that we heard loud and clear from you all in our first virtual meeting. And we are happy to provide more examples of other NHLs that, have highway signs and things like that. But it's also something we're working in within our own program of how to assist.
Also something that came to mind in our archives, I don't think we have many interpretive materials on our landmark designation. And maybe that's something, Audrey's here, maybe that's something that would be appropriate for our archives, is to have some interpretive materials on our landmark designation. Just another thought to throw out there.
I love interpretation.
Questions?
My name is Tony Elms, and I live on Donald Ross Drive. Traffic is probably the first or second order of magnitude issue for the village. You mentioned curvilinear streets within the village district. We have the advantage or disadvantage also of having major interactions with state roads. What specifically can and should the village do or not do on the streets that they control to preserve our recommendations or your recommendations?
So this is one thing where we said that we just need to talk early and talk often and consult as projects start to come up so that we can find that balance between the historic plan and pedestrian and traffic concerns. So I can't give you like a complete layout right now. It would be a project by project where we work with everybody together and all of our consulting partners. I'm sorry, I can't give you a more definitive answer.
Questions?
Well, on that note, I want to thank everybody for attending every meeting and putting your input in, as Cynthia said, because the public involvement in answering our questions and even just being here means a lot to us, so that we are really trying to build this relationship with the NHL here, and so we can preserve the NHL.
Ellen, thanks very much. Thanks also to Ellen Turco, Cynthia, who's with us today, and Alicia. The report is available through the websites, as everyone has seen them. I know many of you here have looked through that already, and I encourage you to continue to do that, whether it's on the village website or through the Park Service itself. And Renee, thank you again for being here. I'll come and see you as soon as the meeting is over. Unless there are any other questions, we'll adjourn this meeting, and thank you for your attention. Good day.